In this video, I'm gonna walk you through how to set up UnityAds and how to use it to monetize your Unity mobile game. I'm gonna be using Unity 2021.3, which is the current LTS version, and the current version of UnityAds SDK is 4.1, so that's what we're gonna be using in this video. To start using UnityAds, you need to first add that SDK, and one of the ways is going to add it, project settings, and under services, we have the ads right here. Now, for us to get access to the ads settings, we need to create or connect to the Unity project ID. So let's create a project ID. Just answer the question, and that's all it took for us to create the project ID. Now we can see the options for the Unity ads, and currently the ads is actually in the off state. And to turn around, we just click on this. I did make a Unity ads tutorial previously with using 3.7, but the APIs have been changed, so I am remaking this tutorial for you guys. If you're liking the tutorials that I make and you want to support this channel, there is a link to my Patreon page and you can support through there. Now that ads are initialized, you can see that my ads package is currently at 3.7.5. and the latest version is at 4.1. So this might be the case if you have started the project before the new version was released. To install the newest version, you can just click install latest version and click yes. And that's going to start the installation process. Okay, so the installation is done and we are up to date. 4.1 is the current version that we're using. Some of the options that we have here is to enable the test mode. So we are going to be testing games, so might as well enable that. Just make sure that you disable test mode when you're finally publishing your game. And we have the game IDs here for Android and iOS. Those were created automatically for us, so we don't have to do anything. And that is it for setting up the SDK for our game. Now, if you need to know how to use the SDK, you can always go to the documentation. And what we're interested in is in the Unity Developer Integration Guide. There is the step for installing Unity SDK. In here, it shows how you can do it through Package Manager, but we did it through the servers and ad settings. The next step is for us to initialize Unity SDK. And in here, we have an example of how to initialize it. If you understand how all of this works, you can just copy and use this as a base. But I'm going to recreate this right now, step by step, so I can better explain what's going on and how all of this is working. So let's go back to Unity and create a new C# file. We'll name it ads initializer, just exactly how the example class is set up. Go inside our script. And the first thing that we need to do is add using UnityEngine.Advertisement so that we can access all of the advertisement initialization. Now inside here, let's create a public method and let's call it initialize ads. The reason why you want to leave it public is if you actually want to initialize it from outside of this class. So if your game manager is the one that initializing the advertisement, you can call this method in this class to initialize the ads. Now to actually initialize Unity ads, we need to access the advertisement.initialize. And in here we can pass three different options: game ID, test mode, and also a listener to when the Unity ads have been initialized. So we're going to use this option right here. So let's create some variables that we can pass inside the initialization. So as the first thing, let's create a string and let's call it game ID. The second one will pass in a Boolean for a test mode, and let's set the default value to be true. Now for the game ID, if you're just making the game for just Android or iOS, you can just specify that one. But if you're making the game for both platforms, Android and iOS, you have two different IDs that you need to specify for a different platform. So in that case, we'll have to create two more strings. This is going to be for Android game ID, and create another one for iOS game ID. To make it available for you to edit these values in the inspector, you can add the serials field attribute for it, and that will expose these private variables in the inspector. You can make them public to expose them, but this is a more secure way of doing it. Now that we created all of our variables that we need to use, we can pass inside the initialization. The first one is the game ID. We still haven't specified which value we're selecting, the Android or the iOS. We're going to do it in a little bit. The next one is the test mode. And the last one is a listener. Now you can create another class and pass it inside here if you want it to be the listener for the event. But I'm going to actually use this class as the listener as well. And to add the listener ability for it, I'm going to go at the top here and add the listener interface. Once you include that, you get an error, and it's asking for us to implement the interfaces, which has two methods that are required: on initialize complete and on initialize failed. So we can click implement interface, and it's going to add those two methods to our class. So now we can pass this as the listener because we can listen for these events in this class as well. So now that we have passed all the variables for our initialize method, we need to make sure we specify the correct game ID for the platform that we are using. And the way you can do that is by setting a game ID to Android or iOS game ID based on the platform that we're using. So let's check for our application.platform, and that will give us the current platform that the game is running on. And we can compare it to a value that we can get from runtime platform. And let's check for iPhone player. So if it's an iPhone player, that means that we're running the game on an iOS device. So add a question mark here. If the game is running on iOS, we want to pass the iOS game ID, and then we can use colon for else. So if it's not true, then we'll pass the Android game ID like that. And I misspelled Android game ID, so let's rename that game ID, apply. And now that is fixed. And with that, our script is ready to be used. Now, if you want to initialize the advertisement inside of this class whenever you start the game, what you can do is use a wake method, and inside here you can run the initialize ads method that we created. Once the initialization goes through, or if it fails, we're going to get a trigger from one of these. So currently it's going to throw an exception that we have not implemented this method. So let's replace it with a debug log message saying that UnityAds initialization completed. And for the other one, let's add a debug log message as well. Now let's save this class. And the class that we just created is exactly the same that we have here as an example. I hope I provided enough explanation for what's going on here, but let's go back to Unity. And in our game for level 1, let's create an empty game object. Let's call it ads. In here, we'll add the script that we just created. And now we can put in the game IDs for our game. So let's go back to our project settings, services, ads, and in here we have the Android game ID and the iOS game ID. Just paste those in. And now we can go to console. Let's clear it, click play, and we can see a message that our UnityAds initialization was complete. So we successfully did that. The next thing is to implement the ads. So you have 3 different ads in Unity. Basic ad, which is an ad that you can display at any point of time. A rewarded ad is when a user clicks on a button to get a reward for watching an ad. And the banner ad is an ad that is displayed on the screen during the gameplay, somewhere at the bottom or top. The implementations for the ads are really similar, but they are also a little bit different. Let's take a look at implementing the basic Unity ad. So the 2 steps that we need to take here is to load the ad unit, and after it's loaded, to show the ad unit. In this example, we can see that advertisement.load to achieve that, and advertisement.show is to show that Unity ad. The add Unity ID is passed in as a parameter for it, and also you can pass the class that is a listener. In this case, this class implements the load listener and show listener interfaces. The add unit IDs are created in your Unity monetization dashboard. So right here we have the monetization tab for our game cube that we just created. and it's telling us to complete the activation. So let's do that. I'm not using mediation on UnityAds, so let's just leave it at that. Click OK, and that completes that activation. Right here, we can see that we have some default ad units that were created for iOS and for Android separately. And we can see the IDs that we need to use underneath here. So those are the unit IDs that we'll have to use in our code here. Now let's go to our code and add that in. I'll use the same class that we already created, but if you'd like, you can create a separate class. So let's create a public method, return void, and this is going to be the load interstitial ad. And in here, we can call advertisement.load, and we can pass the unit ID here. Now you probably want to use the same setup that we have here, checking what type of platform this game is running on, and then selecting the iOS ID or the Android ID. To save time in this tutorial, I won't do the setup, but you can follow exactly the same thing we did for initialization. But what I'll do is just pass in the interstitial ad for Android, and I'll also pass this class as the listener for the load events. Now, I get an error because I have not implemented that listener. So let's do that. UnityAds load listener, and let's fix the error by implementing this interface. And right here we have the two methods that are implemented on UnityAds loaded and on UnityAds failed to load. So for the on Unity failed to load, let's just throw a debug message, and I need to replace that with placement ID. But when we successfully load the ad, I want to display the advertisement. So advertisement.show, and in here we can pass the placement ID that we got the event from. Also, let's connect this class as the listener as well for the show events. And let's go implement that as well. So go back at the top and let's say Unity show listener. And let's fix the error by implement the interfaces. There are 4 methods that are implemented here. So on add show failure, on ads show start, on ads show click, and on add show complete. So you have the option of acting in your game properly based on the response that you get. Probably on show start, you want to pause all activity in your game. And on add show click, if you need to do anything in your game, if the ad was clicked, you can do it here. And whenever the show ad is complete, you can add your code here. Now show complete comes with show completion status, and we can check what options that we have here. So it's either going to be completed, skipped, or unknown. The check for this status is more important when we're going to be taking a look at the rewarded ads. From here, you'll be deciding if you give the player a reward or not. But we have those options. We're just gonna leave these methods empty for now. So I'm gonna remove those throw exceptions. And let's go at the top here. And where we have successfully initialized the Unity ads, we're gonna load an interstitial ad. Before we run the game, let's add some debug messages here so that we know what's going on. So there we have all these methods triggering something, and let's actually add one here as well. Click save. Let's go to Unity and let's run it. So you can see that UnityAds initialized completed. Then we get an on UnityAds add loaded event. And after that, we get on UnityAds show start. So everything seems like it's working properly. Let's click skip. We can see that we get another event on UnityAds show complete, and our game is continuing. Now, each time I hit the cube, the game actually restarts, but we're not getting the ads to be displayed again. And that is because how we have it set up currently. So let's go back to the script and I'll show you what's going on. The first thing that we do when the scene restarts is on awake initialize ads, but you need to run advertisement initialize only once during your game start. And after that, you don't have to run it. If you run advertisement initialize again, which is exactly what we're doing right now, it's actually not going to be doing anything. So because we're not initializing the advertisement again on every time we start, we don't get on initialize complete event, which is currently responsible for loading the interstitial ad. So what we can do here is to check if the advertisement is initialized or not. So let's do an if statement and check for advertisement.isInitialized. If it is initialized, we can do our code here. Otherwise, we want to run the initialize ads method. If it's initialized, what I can do is run this method initialize complete, and it's going to be doing the same thing that we're doing when we initialize. But let's not do that. Instead, we'll just load the interstitial ad here. And let's add a debug log message saying that advertisement is initialized. Let's save that and go back to Unity editor, click play, and we can see our ad is being displayed. But you can also see that we have events that are being triggered nonstop. And the reason why that is happening is because the game is actually still running in the background. And that is where it's important that you are stopping your game when you get on UnityAds show start. Let's go and do that for our game. And the way I'm going to do it here is by setting the time scale to 0 when we show the ad. And then when the ad shows complete, I'm going to set a time scale back to 1. Let's click save, go back to our game, click play. And now you can see that the events are just triggered only once. And if we click skip, you can see that the game starts. If we hit the cube, the game restarts and we get the ad again. So that was just a quick way that I can pause the game in my case. But for your game, you need to make sure that you do everything that is needed here to pause your game. So if you need to disable some controls, if you need to stop the timer or something like that, you need to take into consideration here and put the appropriate code here. So that was the implementation of the Unity basic ad. You can look at the example here and see what they are doing here and how they have it set up. One thing that I'll mention here is the load and show ads are separate here because you might want to load the ad ahead of time, have it prepared, and once you know that you want to show that ad, you can trigger the show ad and show it right at that time without waiting for the ad to be loaded. So if that's the approach you want to take, the option for that is there. Now let's take a look at the rewarded ad. And in here, the setup is exactly the same as for the basic ad. We also see that there is a field for a button, and that is because the rewarded ad is something that is triggered by the player voluntarily, knowing that if he will watch this ad, he's going to get some reward. So the setup to listen for the click on the button is actually inside this code as well. But the way you use the rewarded ads, you use the advertisement load ad and then advertisement show ad. The place where it's different for the rewarded ad is you need to check inside of the show complete for the status that you get. So let's go and do that now. So I'm going to create another method. Let's say public void, and this is going to be load rewarded ad. And in here, we're going to say advertisement.load and pass the rewarded ID here. I'm going to use the Android one by default, but again, you can use the same setup that we did for the initialization to determine which one you want to use based on the platform that the game is running on. For the listener, we're going to use this class. And because we have implemented this class for the interstitial ad, the rewarded ad uses the same listeners. And because of that, we don't have to create new listeners for the rewarded ad. Now, if you skip that part in the video where we set it up, you can go back to the basic ad and see how all of those listeners work. Now we can actually test the rewarded ad. So let's go to the top right here. And in the awake method, whenever we have the advertisement initialized, instead of loading the interstitial ad, we're going to load the rewarded ad. But in your game, you would trigger this load reward ad with some kind of button that is in your UI. So whenever we launch the game, first time, we're going to see the interstitial ad. And then after the game restarts, we're going to see the rewarded ad. One more thing that I'm going to do is go to the bottom right here, and I will add here to show the status that we get. So let's just print the status, click save, Let's go to Unity and let's click play. So this is our interstitial ad and nothing has changed here. So let's click skip and we can see on UnityAds show complete, we get a status skipped. That's the status that we get for the interstitial ad. Now the game restarted and we can see our rewarded ad. And once we click close, you can see that we get a status of completed. So that is the status that you're looking for if you want to give the player the reward or not. So let's go back to the code, and inside here, the way we can check if we want to give a reward to a player or not is by checking for the status. So let's look at UnityAds show complete status. The one that we're looking for is completed, and we can check if it's equal to the show status that we get in this method. If we get completed, we want to reward the player. So I'll just do a debug log message here, but you can run the logic that is responsible for rewarding the player in here. So let's click save and test it out. So the first ad is the interstitial ad. And for this one in the editor, we get two options, either to skip or to close. And we skipped it last time and we got a complete status of skipped. But in here, if we click close, you can see that we also get a completed status, which also triggers our rewarded player script. So we'll take a look at how we can avoid that. But now we have our actual rewarded video loaded here. When we click close, the completed status was triggered again, and we got the reward for the second time. So if you're implementing both types of ads in your game, then you want to make sure that you're rewarding the right one. The way we can do it is by using the placement ID that is passed here. So in here we can say placement ID and make sure it equals to the placement ID of our rewarded video ad. The rewarded video ad ID that we're using is just rewarded Android, but if you're using the iOS, you need to make sure you check for the appropriate platform here as well. So with that, we have two checks that we're doing here. We're checking for the placement ID, making sure that it's the rewarded video. And then we're checking for the status, if it's completed or not. And that way we know for sure that we need to reward the player. If you have more than one reward UnityAds ID, you can also determine the different rewards that you'll give here. So if the reward video Android, you can give one reward. And if it's a reward video Android 2, you can give a second reward here. So that is if you created multiple placement IDs for different places to give the user different rewards. You can use the same UnityAds ID for different rewards, but you'll have to make sure that you pass the right information with your button clicks to give the right reward for the right button click. The benefit of having multiple UnityAds IDs is that you can track each button separately and see the performance in your dashboard. So now if I close this ad, you can see that we get a complete status, but it doesn't trigger the reward for the player. But if I close this one, then we get a trigger for the reward player. So that is how you use rewarded ad. The last ad type that we have is a banner ad. And the implementation of a banner ad is different than the implementation of the other two ads. I'm not sure why they decided to use delegates for banner ads instead of using the interface approach that was used for the other two ad types. But if you want to use the banner ads in Unity, you're going to have to use this approach. The banner ads also have two-step process. You need to load the banner ad and then you can show the banner ad. So let's go and set that up. I'm going to create everything at the bottom of our class. And in here, we want to create another method, public, and we'll say load banner ad. And in here, we can call advertisement.banner.load. And we have several options here. So we can just load it with options, load it with the placement ID, load it with the placement ID and the banner options. So let's use the banner ID for our Android. And in here, we're going to create our banner load options. Now the banner load options has two callbacks that we can pass. It's a load callback, and it's when we successfully loaded the banner. For that, we'll have to create some methods. So let's create on banner loaded method and pass that as the method here on a banner loaded. And let's create the other one on error callback. Create the method void on banner error, and here we'll get a string with a message. And in here we can connect that method on banner error and add our semicolon. If our banner successfully loads, this method will be triggered, and in here we can call the advertisement.banner.show. And again, we can pass the placement ID or the ad unit ID here, and we can pass the banner options here. So let's take a look at the banner options that we have available here. The ones that we have here is a click callback, a hide callback, and a show callback. So if you want to use any of those callbacks, you can add them just like we added here, but I'm not going to use any of those callbacks. So let's get the loaded banner ad loaded at the time when we complete initialization. In here, we just say load banner ad and save the file. Let's go back to Unity editor and let's click play. So the banner ad is at the top left corner, and that's the default position for it. If you want to change the position for it, we can go inside here, and under advertisement.banner, we have an option of setting position. And in here, we can use the positions presets from the banner position, and the options that we have: bottom center, bottom left, and all of these. I'm looking at the bottom center, so I'm gonna use that. Save that, and we can test it now. So now the banner is at the bottom center, and we have access to our buttons. You wouldn't want the banner to be displayed when other ads are displayed, so you need to make sure that you hide the banner ads when other ads are displaying. And we can do that by going in here where we show the other ads and look for advertisement.banner. And here we have the option for hiding. To show the ad, we can do that inside here, advertisement.banner.show. And we need to specify the banner ID that we're trying to show. Now with that, you can see that whenever we have an ad loaded, the banner is not being displayed. If we close it, you can see that the banner appears. Then when we get the other ad, it disappears again. Close it, and the ad is shown. So that is the last type of ad that we have available in Unity Ads. I tried to cover everything that you need to know about Unity Ads and how to implement it in your game. Now, all you have to do is choose which ads you want to implement and how you want them to be integrated into your game. After you've done that and tested out your game and ready to publish it, make sure that you don't forget to turn off the testing mode, and you should be all good with that. If you want to use Unity Ads with visual scripting, I'll leave a link in the description to the video once that video is going to be available. But I hope you found this video useful. Be sure to click on that like button, and I'll see you in the next one.